Hello, everybody. Welcome back. This is an interesting video, wasn't it? We are up to the panel 5, for which the chair is Persida Lazarevic. Hello, Persida, also from Ljubljana. Excellent. We have this really excellent talks and the conference going on. So now we have 3 presenters. You will be I would kindly ask you to present them. And at the end, of course, the questions, which should be put in the chat or in the Q&A. So please, thank you.
Thank you, Ines. So we are panel number 5, and we have the first panelist, the first speaker, Fiona Black, who is professor at School of Information Management, Dalhousie University in Canada. I suppose I pronounced it well. Her ideas for using GIS for book history research were considered groundbreaking. And her print culture research has been consistently supported by personal and collaborative grants from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. Fiona will present her paper about methods and frameworks for exploring print cultures, places, and spaces.
I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, yes, I will turn my video and audio.
Oh, that's just fine. Thank you very much. Thank you, Persida, and hello, everyone. I'm going to set the scene for my case study and then move to my suggested framework and its inherent methods. This 1870s map makes clear the location of Scotland's capital city, Edinburgh, in relation to London. By this period, Edinburgh had a long-standing reputation for high-quality printing, and a wide range of London-based publishers contracted with Edinburgh firms. For local printers, such work formed a strong complement to the contracts from Edinburgh's own renowned contemporary publishers. The Edinburgh Cooperative Printing Company, or ECPC as I shall refer to it, was incorporated in 1873, launched with a share offering of 10,000 shares of £1 each. The company's first appearance in the city's directory was alongside 84 other printing firms. ECPC was founded by a group of skilled printers following a disastrous, lengthy wintertime strike by members of the Edinburgh Typographical Society. The founders located the business in a particularly strategic location. Their socio-political convictions informed the intellectual space that their printing operations developed with and among numerous private clients, including contracts with several cooperative societies, student groups, suffragettes, and more. ECPC's early promotional materials emphasized that they were the largest jobbing printers in the city. Within a few years, their business-savvy printer managers adopted the additional business name of the Darien Press, under which rubric they became nationally and internationally known for the excellence of their book printing, while their jobbing printing continued under the ECPC name, all from the same presses. Their printer's mark for Darien was designed by Walter Crane, the artist, book illustrator, and member of the famous arts and crafts movement. The company was unique among British cooperative printing firms in being incorporated under the Companies Act rather than under the Associations Act. Its founders merged elements of the 19th century cooperative movement with strategic business goals and knowledge, and their labour supporting practices were highlighted in reports of the cooperative movement and in government documents. The initial share offering attracted members of the printing and allied trades as listed here, some in Edinburgh and some further afield. Other shareholders represented a wide array of trades, professions, and some blocks of shares were bought by manufacturing or retail cooperative societies across Britain. Robert Darnton's well-known communication circuit, first published in the 1970s, remains a highly cited model of agents producing and impacting print culture. Thus, his model suggests more or less explicit networks between, though not necessarily among, the major roles. Furthermore, there are implicit geographies, as the model was developed from his deep research into the activities of the Société Typographique de Neuchâtel and numerous boundary crossings, especially between France and Switzerland. This visualization, while markedly different, still speaks to the culture of print. It suggests some layers of data that may be queried and analyzed within a geographic information system, or GIS, for print culture research. Geographic location or place is clearly explicit here, while networks are implicit until analysis has been performed that may indicate the presence of relationships and patterns. I focus briefly today on elements relating to the top 3 layers illustrated here: sites of activities, some characteristics of those involved with ECPC Darien, and communication. Actor network theory was first developed by the French philosopher, anthropologist, and sociologist Bruno Latour, and many fields have adopted and adapted aspects of his thinking. His theory, and I quote, may look at explicit strategies for relating different elements together into a network so that they form an apparently coherent whole. Relations among actors need to be repeatedly worked at, or a specific network may dissolve, end of quote. Any industry can be described in terms of networks and networks within networks. The left-hand image here represents both an inherent clarity as well as complexity within industrial networks. The right-hand image suggests one way we might theorize print culture networks along with the influence of location. Any printing business is threaded throughout by both commercial and individual networks. The ECPC Darien dual identity was highly successful. The Darien Press fulfilled innumerable contracts for book printing with major Edinburgh and London printers. Concurrently, both sides of the business contributed to community identities and networks, local, national, and international. The unique nature of this firm makes it a very strong case study for my explorations. Combining the spatial with a consideration of networks, I examined some of the people involved, relationships with and across networks, along with the possibilities of geographies of networks. The Student Union building here was the first such custom building in the world when it opened in the 1890s. It is about a 3-minute walk from ECPC Darien's building. A.B. Fleming and Company were printing ink makers of wide Scottish renown, and their factory was just north of Edinburgh. The books presented here were printed by Darien for E&S Livingston, the medical publishing firm, and most of the volumes were revised and reprinted across decades in multiple editions for their global audiences of practitioners, researchers, and students. Networks typically facilitate cooperation amongst actors while acknowledging competitive aspects. This 2-page advertisement was inserted by the press's manager, John Comyn, in the Edinburgh and Leith City Directory in 1889. This reflects important elements of both place and space, and it is explicit about the 2 different names, identities, of the firm, which planned to compete successfully with other printers. Many of these other printers seemed content, judging by this particular directory, simply to be listed with a single line of text as one among many printing firms. Looking more closely at John Comyn's special insert with this promotion, page 2 of the promotion lists quotes from those aligned with the goal of true excellence in printing, which they make clear justifies John Comyn's use of the term superior on page 1 for all 3 classes of ECPC Darien work: book printing, pamphlet printing, and commercial work. Furthermore, the quotations listed come from key printing industry periodicals, 2 from London and 1 from the United States, further emphasizing the reach of the firm's reputation and networks across national and international borders. Now I shall focus on location. The firm's premises on Bristow Place, indicated by the arrow here, were on one of the few routes that linked and still link the 2 major areas of central Edinburgh: the new town to the north, which was completed around 1850, and the old town to the south. For the area outlined in orange, even its extremities can be reached within a 20-minute walk from the company's location, a fact I believe directly contributed to the firm's success and ensuing reputation. Whilst this bird's eye view map excludes the dense residential buildings of the old town, it includes many of the important institutions that contributed to the company's success. I should point out that this company was the only one within that orange oval that I showed you, the only printing company. The arrow indicates the site of the printing works again, and the white stars show the locations of key University of Edinburgh buildings, including the Students' Union. Members of the university and its libraries contracted in a number of ways with the firm for a wide range of products, from library catalogues to various student-run periodical publications. Some professors paid the ECPC side of the business to print specialised stationery for them, one such being Charles Serraly, the Belgian consul in Edinburgh and a professor of French. The yellow hovers over the magnificent Edinburgh Public Library, newly built at that time with some of Andrew Carnegie's money. Darien printed their main and subsidiary catalogues over many years. The blue star represents the city's Royal Infirmary, for which, along with related health facilities, the firm printed annual reports and more across decades. The green star highlights Heriot-Watt College, an education institution where Darien staff attended or contributed to evening classes for the printing and allied trades, and for which Darien printed reports and keynote addresses to students. The brown star locates Edinburgh City Chambers, the home of the city's governing council, for which Darien printed. Finally, that red star represents the offices of those internationally renowned medical publishers, E&S Livingston. It is a 2-minute walk from Darien to Livingston's. Proximity helps, though that spatial factor alone would not lead to close and successful relationships in the absence of shared values, business goals, and technical competencies. Turning to a consideration of key characteristics of a network actor, the one I'm choosing to highlight here is John Comyn. However, I could equally have chosen George W. Jones, who was a star printer in the later 19th century, and he became foreman at the Darien Press for a few years before moving to Raithby and Lawrence in the firm of Raithby and Lawrence in Leicester. And he was instrumental in boosting the quality and the promotional aspects. So back to John. The first manager of the firm served for many years, and we've already met him due to his clarity of purpose with that 2-page advertisement. He was a highly gifted business manager, and he was a successful mentor to many clients, as demonstrated by this award from the University Student Association, the only one ever given to a printer. They were usually awarded to professors. The article accompanying this illustration in the Students' Periodical sang Mr. Comyn's praises for his patient guidance and aid to generations of student leaders who were wholly unfamiliar with the necessary planning, collating, and editing of the annual student handbook. The combination of astute business sense coupled with deep knowledge of his firm's business and personal humility, patience, and attention to detail made John Comyn a critically important actor in ECPC and Darien's connections across multiple networks. Darnton's modelling wisely shows a dotted line leading from the final players in his circuit, the reader, back to the author. This volume, printed by the ECPC in 1886, speaks to just such a line of connection within and across networks. The firm's founding philosophies and intellectual spaces were socialist leaning, and many of their private clients and readers would have shared the views expressed by many, if not quite all, of these well-known speakers and authors of the day. The lectures were presented in Edinburgh in 1866 and were printed and collated into a single volume as here, as well as being printed and widely distributed as a series of individual pamphlets. Contemporary reviews in national or international journals tended to be for individual items, further spreading awareness of the firm amongst those who might have shared interests as readers and authors themselves. The networks amongst individual clients of the firm, corporate and otherwise, here overlap in a project that resulted in 2 quite distinct printing jobs that were, for one specific major event, combined into a single volume with this extremely bright and Scottish identified cover. The intellectual spaces of trade associations and unions, close to the heart of ECPC's founding, made it perhaps an obvious choice to print the programme and related materials for the 1941 Trades Union Congress held in the city. By this time, ECPC had been printer to a number of unions across Britain and was certainly known to this broad community well beyond Edinburgh. The official city guide, commissioned by Edinburgh Council and published by John Menzies or Mingus, was an entirely different proposition, and so was printed under the rubric of Darien. The framework I've described so briefly today will facilitate analysis and comparisons among contemporary printing firms. I highlight here some spatial research questions as well as those relating to network analysis. Spatial questions tend to focus on conditions of what is where and what are the relationships. What are the trends in changes through time in what is happening on the ground with players on the face of the earth? And then also looking for patterns. Network analysis looks specifically at characteristics of the players, the influences across and between networks, and the relationships as well. ECPC Darien's geographic location and enduring business and interpersonal networks greatly influenced its business development and relationships with both private customers and corporate clients. The bibliographic information here is from a volume printed over several editions by Darien for Longmans, one of the London-based publishers with whom Darien had a long-standing series of printing contracts. The firm's private customers might come from just around the corner in Edinburgh, or be working in, for example, a mission to lepers in the Far East. The modes of communication amongst all of these locations included both telephony, which reached Edinburgh in the 1860s, and telegraphy, which arrived slightly later. ECPC Darien was quick off the mark and secured the wonderful promotional telegraphic address simply of printing Edinburgh. This action suggests that they knew the reputation they had gained across industry networks and among their clients in government, civil society, and business. As always, I'm very grateful to my principal funders and to my home institution, Dalhousie University. Although hidden by other buildings in this current photograph, the orange arrow indicates where the Darien Press's building, now empty, still stands. My research continues. Havla, thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. That was wonderful. Okay, so can we hear now? Can we see Barry McKay?
Well, I put my video on and I've unmuted myself. And I
need okay, Barry. Oh,
right. Shall I share screen?
Oh, that's okay. Yeah, Barry McKay, antiquarian. You're the second panelist, Barry. Okay, yeah. Barry McKay, antiquarian, bookseller, and independent scholar. He has lectured and published widely on several aspects of the history of the book, and he will present his paper on printing for a small northern town, books for Whitehaven in the 18th century. Okay.
Great. Let's go. Share. Slideshow. From
that's okay. Yeah.
Right, you got that?
Yeah, we can see it. Okay.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome. For those unfamiliar with Whitehaven, it is a small town on the coast of present-day Cumbria in the far northwest of England. Thanks in no small measure to its port, it rose to a position of national significance during the 18th century before declining with almost equal rapidity over the course of the following century. This talk will look at two aspects of book printing in the town during the period under review: titles intended for the instruction of the town's seafarers and printing in the Manx language. Printing had been introduced to Whitehaven by Thomas Cotton in 1736, after he'd had a peripatetic career which saw him printing in Dublin, Cork, and Waterford in Ireland, before moving to Kendal in the adjacent county of Westmorland in 1730. Little is known of his time in Whitehaven, but the earliest piece of his work of which we have record is the 1738 prospectus for this engraving by Richard Parr after Matthias Reed of an east prospect of the town and harbour. Next slide. Oh, it's working. Cotton died in 1743 and was followed in practice by William Mashada. His earliest known book was Abraham Fletcher's The Universal Measurer, published in 2 volumes in 1752-3. Fletcher was from a hamlet near Cockermouth, just inland from Whitehaven, and was the son of a tobacco pipe maker who taught his son his own trade but gave him no further education. Despite this inauspicious start, he taught himself as best he could, and by the age of 30 had worked his way through Euclid, whereupon he established himself as a teacher of mathematics. This work, being essentially a volume of practical advice and instruction on mensuration, is not immediately obvious of use to mariners. However, its contents do include a number of navigational problems and advice on the making of maps. Furthermore, a lengthy section in his book was intended to be of use to various craftsmen, including advice likely to be very useful to those shipwrights and so forth in the town shipyards. Mashada was both the author and printer of the Navigator's Companion. Before becoming a printer, he had been a schoolmaster, or as he preferred to call it, a philomath. This is an extremely rare book of which there are only 2 known copies, although ESTC locates only a single one of those. In the preface, the author claims to have had upwards of 30 years' experience in the navigational branch of mathematics and of daily conversing with mariners. His work commences with a table of the sun's declination adapted to the Gregorian calendar, which had been introduced into Britain less than 2 years earlier. Thereafter follows some 26 pages listing the latitude and longitudes of eminent towns and cities in the most frequented parts of the world. After many pages of instruction on various related matters, including astronomy, he concludes with an exemplar, a journal of a voyage to Virginia, followed by timetables. One may wonder why a book on accountancy should find a place in a group of works designed for the enlightenment and use of mariners, but I feel an exception could be made for Edmund Fitzgerald's Epitome of the Elements of Italian Bookkeeping, printed for the author by Alison Foster in 1771. Of the printer, very little is known. This appears to be the earliest of 7 titles he printed between 1771 and 1774. He was not present in Whitehaven when a census was taken of the town's residents in 1762, but there is some slender evidence for him still being there in 1816. Although ESTC only locates 5 copies of this book, to which may be added a copy in the local studies library in Whitehaven, it appears to have enjoyed a reasonable contemporary success, with some 560 copies being subscribed. Of this number, 257 went to subscribers in Whitehaven, and that includes a number of names that can be identified as merchants of the town. Furthermore, 42 of the subscribers were ship's captains, and a further 60 copies were taken up by other captains in the nearby ports of Workington and Maryport. An examination of the contents reveal why. The iconography of the frontispiece, as you can see here, for instance, shows a vessel in full sail seen through the author's window, an indication perhaps of at least part of the intended audience. The contents are even more revealing, for they include advice on exporting and importing goods, drawing up bills of lading, arranging shipping insurance with examples of policies, and illustrating examples of keeping waste, ledger, and ship's books. One plate in pie chart form shows the different rates of exchange between London and several European ports. Also among the information given is the capacity of barrels, which were used for transporting many types of goods by sea, and from which we can learn that while a barrel of ale contained 34 gallons throughout England, in London you only received 32 gallons for your money. I think I missed a slide there. Sorry about that. Yeah, never mind. Another rare Whitehaven is John Draper's Navigator's Vanemecum, which again ESTC locates in only a single copy. This title was once more printed by Alison Foster, while the other booksellers listed on the imprint may be identified as Matthew Little of Whitehaven, who took a dozen copies of Fitzgerald's Epitome noted a moment or two ago, and John Copeland, also of Whitehaven, while T. Davis is perhaps Thomas Davis of Covent Garden, London. Unfortunately, there is no subscribers list to offer any guidance as to how widely the book may have been distributed. Commencing with a handsome allegorical frontispiece, the author takes us through the development of navigation from biblical and classical references up to, quote, its present state of perfection, end quote. Chapters are devoted to arithmetic, logarithms and the use of the slide rule, and trigonometry with rules respecting longitude. Thereafter follows instructions for sailing by Mercator's projection, observing the sun's declination, compass variations and instructions of daily dead reckoning, all being related with various examples and problems. The work also includes a great deal of useful information on such matters as timetables, recording the high water mark time at many ports, matters of some importance when nearing landfall, and tables of latitude and longitude of numerous destinations around both Great Britain and elsewhere in the world. Excuse me. Finally, there are pages of meridian parts, transverse tables and logarithms, pages and pages of tabular setting, which must have been tedious to the compositor, even if they added a few extra pennies to the wages of those employed at piecework rates. Included is a chart of the Irish Sea, which you can see to the right, which includes most of the cross sea and mainland coastal areas and included major destinations where so many goods were transported by sea at a time when the English road system left much to be desired. Once again, we find Alanson Foster, the printer of William Chambers' Universal Navigator of 1774. Again, it's an uncommon book today with only 3 recorded copies. In his text, Chambers promises that within his work, he presents the young navigator with general rules for keeping a journal, the logbook and leeway variations, how to account for them, and again, almost inevitably, the reader is presented with useful tables. By way almost of justification, Chambers apologizes for seeming impertinence, since so many, both at home and abroad, have written on the subject, while some of which being too prolix in theory and too short in the practical parts, others have in great measure neglected the theory. The 513 subscribers include 220 ship's captains and a sailmaker, and argue that his work enjoyed a reasonable contemporary success. Finally, on the subject of navigational works, we have a ghost. John Ware Sr. apparently wrote, printed and published a work called The European Pilot or Navigator's Pocket Companion. There is mention of an edition of this book in an article published in the late 19th century, to which a tentative publication date of 1777 has since been made. It presumably did appear as a second edition as advertised in the Cumberland Packet in November 1785, advertised as being in the press and will be published in a few days. But I have been able to unable to locate the existence of a single copy of either edition. Like many a provincial town in the 18th century, Whitehaven saw a wide range of printed matter. Sermons, poetry, newspapers, jobbing work, and a notable contribution to the genre of English chapbooks. But perhaps the most significant contribution to the town's printers came in the form of printing in the Manx language for use at the Isle of Man, seen here from a view just south of Whitehaven. So it's not far away across the Irish Sea, as you can see. Ellen Vannin to give the small island in the Irish Sea its vernacular form. There's a great deal of interchange between Whitehaven and the island. Manx is a Gaelic language of which the last native speaker died in 1794. However, by 2015, some 1,800 persons had at least a degree of conversational ability as a second language. Thus, it remains an important contribution to the island's cultural heritage. William Walker had translated part of the New Testament, which had been printed in London in 1763. This translation of St. Paul's Epistle to the Romans was completed by James Wilkes and printed on the island, probably at Ramsey, by William Shepherd, a Whitehaven printer who presumably had moved with press and type to the island to print the work. Although a tall octavo in size, the collation is in folio format, and I cannot help but wonder if the large quantity of the letters G, J, and Y needed in contemporary Manx meant that only 2 pages at a time could be set and printed from the type available. Again, it is a rare title with but 3 copies located, only 2 of which are recorded on ESTC. Arguably without equal in the annals of Whitehaven typography is the complete Manx Bible. The Old Testament was first printed by John Ware and his sons in 2 octavo volumes in 1771-3, and as shown here in a single monumental quarto volume in 1775, of which 500 copies were printed, set largely in 3 columns. Translated into Manx by Thomas Wilson, Bishop of Sodor and Man, this work is also noticeable as it fixed the modern orthography of the Manx language. It was later reported that the vessel on which the manuscript was being carried to Whitehaven was driven ashore just north of the town, and the volume was secured by one Reverend Cully, who, holding it above the waves with one hand, swam ashore with the other. You can believe it if you want to. In the same year, the Wares completed their octavo Bible when they printed an edition of the New Testament in Manx to join the same format Old Testament of 1771-3. The Book of Common Prayer had been translated into Manx in 1610 by John Phillips, Bishop of Sodor and Man, who died in 1633. Despite being the first datable text in the Manx language, its translation remained unpublished until the Oxford University Press published an edition in 1895. Another edition in octavo, published by Robert Radcliffe and Matthew Cooey, was printed in London in 1765 by J. and W. Oliver for the Society Promoting Christian Knowledge, who distributed it gratis. Only 4 years later, another edition, this time in duodecimal format, was printed on Ramsey on the Isle of Man. As you can see from the imprint, this time the printing was undertaken by M. Shepherd. That's Mary Shepherd, William Shepherd's widow. But she's known to have been still active in Whitehaven at that time. And so, like her husband, perhaps she sent a press and type and perhaps also a journeyman to the island to produce the work. The majority of the text is set in 2 columns with all the headings and rubrics in English, and also included the Psalms. Like the previous editions, this was distributed gratis by SPCK, who presumably either paid for the edition in total or heavily subsidized its publication. Once again, the Wares got in on the act, and in 1777 printed a quarto edition of the Common Prayer Book, set largely in 3 columns. Again, the headings and rubrics were in English, and again, the Psalms are included. And if you compare the text to a contemporary English language edition, you'll note that all the instructions for behavior and so forth are in English, including one to the celebrant to ensure that anybody coming to Holy Communion has not been, and I quote, naughty, unquote. In the same year, the Wares also printed an edition in duodecimo, as complete as the quarto edition, but on this occasion set in 2 columns. The smaller format of this edition was presumably aimed at those in the pews rather than designed for lectern use by clerics at the celebration of the Mass. Neither of these editions are recorded as being the recipients of the ASPCK's largesse, but it is difficult to escape the conclusion that their support was not also given to these publications. Although John Ware Jr. was to print a final Whitehaven edition of this cornerstone of the Anglican worship in Manx in 1808, one cannot help but feel that with the later works discussed above, the zenith of printing in Whitehaven had been reached. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Barry.
How do I get rid of this?
I don't know. Just
if you don't know. Perhaps if I press something there. Well, I don't do leave, dare I? Can somebody advise me how to get...
Just close your PowerPoint presentation. Just
oh, yeah, that's true. File, close. Oh, right. File exit.
Close.
Yeah, God, I'm sorry about this. The trouble is there's something across the top of my screen that now cut things out. Oh, God.
I think you must stop sharing the screen.
Yeah, but how?
Yeah, on the button. Just press the button.
That button?
No, down.
Has it
on
gone?
The application. No.
Let me, Max. Oh, I'm sorry, everybody. How did...
We're all in the same boat.
Yeah.
What about the cross at the top? That's it.
Okay,
Hey,
that's great.
I had to go all the way around the houses to get there. Oh, God, don't you love technology?
We have a third panelist now, and it's Irena Eiselt. I hope there is Irena.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Who completed her postgraduate studies at the Ljubljana Faculty of Arts, Department of Art History, and she's been working at the currently the Slovenian National University Library, and she's currently head of the collection department. Her research focuses on the history of photography and historical newspapers, and Irena will present her paper on Greetings from Bled, Picture Postcards as a 19th century mass communication media. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to the organizers to be the part of this event. In my presentation, I will talk shortly about birth and development of the 19th century mass media communication tool, picture postcards, with a focus on some of the key aspects which contributed to the rise of a new media, analyzing the postcards of Bled from the collection held by National University Library. The postcard has two fathers. In 1865, Heinrich von Stephan proposed the creation of Offenes Postblad with the goal to simplify the letter format and to reduce the work, paper, and costs involved in the sending of a short message. The idea was not so well received in Germany. A few years later, in 1869, Emanuel Hermann suggested the same communication tool, and this time the idea was well accepted. And the official history of the postcard begins with the first postal card, Korrespondenzkarte, which was issued by the Austro-Hungarian Post Office on October 1st, 1869. A postcard was printed on a thin cream cardstock that measured in height 8.5 centimeters and in length 12 centimeters. The front of the card carried the inscription Korrespondenzkarte, which arced over an imperial Habsburg eagle and 3 lines for the name and address. In the upper right corner, an imprinted stamp bore the Emperor Franz Joseph profile. All were enclosed in a decorative frame that ran around the edges. The card back had a blank space for a handwritten message. In Slovene translation, it was first named as Listnica and after 1873 as Dopisnica. The invention of the postcard involves multiple moments of newness. To name a few: the expansion of the railway, the development of the postal system, the increasing democratization of travel, advanced printing technology, advancement of photography, the introduction of the carte de visite, and stereograph photographs, just to name a few of them. Germany, Switzerland, and Austria led the way in the evolution from the plain postcard to the picture postcard, which as a term serves as an umbrella term for all illustrated, graphically or photographically cards that have a corresponding print for the address. The first illustrations began to appear in 1870s, where the graphical part occupied less space and the greater part was devoted to a text message. Around 1890, the first pattern, the form Gruß aus, greetings from, with combined up to 3, 5, or 7 views began to appear. After 1896, when the printing industry started to produce a series of postcards, the graphical part became bigger and bigger until the postcards took the shape we know today. We divide picture postcards to printed and photo postcards. Although photography was available by the time the first postcards appeared, real photographs were not used as postcards until almost the turn of the 20th century. Instead, photographs formed the basis from which the image was reproduced. From the late 19th century until the first half of the 20th century is a period known as the Golden Age of printed postcards. While there is no complete statistical study of the production of postcards in mentioned period, it has been calculated that were mailed around 140 billion postcards. Postcard production was an important line for the printing industry. Some countries, especially Germany, produced so many postcards that they were a major export. The first major series of Slovenian towns in the technique of color lithography are made by the artistic institution Lesk und Schwiedernach in Vienna. Other postcard publishers from the end of the 19th century depicting Slovenian towns were, for example, Stengel from Dresden, Karl Otto Haidt and Burger from Munich, Jurišek from Salzburg, Otto Leder from Meissen, Fischer from Innsbruck, Steiner from Graz, just to name a few of them. The oldest picture postcard depicts one of the most interesting and most visited tourist destinations in Slovenia from 19th century until today, Bled. The postcard was printed in 1890 and belongs to the first major series of Slovenian towns made by artistic institution Lesk und Schwiedernach in Vienna. We can see all the attributes explained before, from the pattern, Gruß aus, greetings from, to the front, exclusively devoted to the title, and the back to the image and message. The postcard is part of the biggest landscape picture postcard collection in Slovenia, which is kept in graphic collection of the Slovenian National and University Library. It consists of more than 48,000 postcards, 6,500 of them are digitized and attached to the portal Digital Library of Slovenia. As we said, Bled was a popular tourist destination in the second half of the 19th century, known primarily as a health resort, and as such became one of the most often depicted places in the Upper Carniolan region of northwestern Slovenia. In general, postcards help create tourist sites. They represent a view of some town or place of interest to the passing traveler. Sending postcards became requisite for anyone traveling abroad and became a part of the experience of tourism itself. The postcard became the form of media most closely associated with travel and communication from abroad. These connotations remained throughout the 20th century and into the 21st. Local professional photographers made a living by taking portrait studio photographs. At the end of the 19th century, the decline of orders of portrait studio photographs made them to start thinking about an additional source of income, and this is one of the reasons why they expanded their offer by making picture postcards. For larger editions of more visited tourist places, they cooperated with the printing industry. Meanwhile, they made images of smaller towns produced in smaller editions as photo postcards. Professional photographers, Benedikt Lerget-Porer with his studio in Bled and Fran Pavlin with his studio in Jesenice, near Bled, have a great deal of credit for the development of Bled's tourism with depiction of Bled on postcards. Soon after the first postcards, the first collectors appeared. Collector fever included the whole of society. Thanks to them, so many postcards have been preserved. In Slovenia, collecting flourished from the last decade of the 19th century and lasted to the end of the First World War. Then it was revived in the 1980s and 1990s. Postcards were the most highly collectible items of the time. They were inexpensive, attractively diverse, compact, and available. And to conclude, during the time of their existence, postcards shifted from being a means of communication to a souvenir to a collectible item, which now present a valuable object from the past for researchers from all different fields, including history, art history, ethnology, and others. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and greetings from Ljubljana.
Thank you very much, Elena. Now we have some time for time for question time, and there is a question for Fiona Black. Two questions. The first one: in the presentation to the printing, the authors and their connection to the printing business was mentioned. To what extent the authors were taken into account when authorial rights were in question? And the other one is from John Hinks, who says that he shares your enthusiasm for a network approach. And do you also find the idea of center and periphery helpful? The first question was from Ines Vodopivec. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both John and to the anonymous questioner.
Ines,
I'm going to take John's first, since I read that one first, and then I will come to the authorial rights one. Yes, I was trained in the center and periphery model, and I've questioned it for some time, in part due to my work with the book acquisition habits of fur traders in the far northwest of Canada, and through my work with the History of the Book in Canada project. I think it's an interesting concept that's worth probing further. So I'd be happy to have a further conversation with you, John, about exactly what you were thinking for your question. The types of research that one can do and the methods one can use have changed during my career, particularly with the increase in potential for partnerships with geographic information scientists and humanities and social science scholars. And so some of the work I've done with grad students who have used GIS has found interesting results from doing the kinds of work one can do within a GIS. One can plot and count locations of things, of course, but one can also do detailed analysis on proximity factors and distances. And I think that might help explore different aspects of the concept of a center and periphery model for any industry. So that's my answer to John. And quickly, because I know there may be questions for other speakers, the authorial rights, I've actually not come across evidence suggesting that authors' rights were in question. So does the questioner have a specific author of interest? ECPC and Darien, when items were published that should be deposited, they either deposited a copy themselves, although if it was a private client, I think they were encouraging their clients to take them to the Advocates Library, which then evolved and its collections joined the National Library of Scotland. So the ECPC Darien's own business records do not survive, except for a very few from their founding days. So all of my research is done tangentially from other sources and publishers' archives. I will end my answers there.
Thank you very much, Fiona. And now we have a question for Barry McKay from Ines. A woman was mentioned to have cooperated in the printing process. Were there many similar cases?
Thank you, Visitor. I assume you mean, or the questioner means, in the Cumbrian context. And I don't know how many constitutes many, but there are 4 of some significance, one of which is Mary Shepherd herself, who of course printed that BCP on the island, or caused it to be printed on the island. Slightly later than her, there was the widow of the first printer in Ulverston down in the south of the county. She continued the press for a short time after her husband's death and advertised for a head workman, requiring all sorts of splendid qualifications, which he clearly had because she married him. The usual way, or a not infrequent way, of getting control of a printing press was to either marry the daughter of or the widow of a printer. And that's what John Sulby did, John Sulby, who's the subject of a monograph by Professor Twyman some years ago. Again, a little bit later, Anne Dunn of Whitehaven, the daughter of the first printer of chapbooks in Cumbria, continued the family business in the 1790s and printed a number of chapbooks and 1 or 2 books, and to whom some poetry publications which have no imprint have been attributed. Finally, there was Anne Bell in Penrith, whose husband again died in the 1770s. She took over the printing business and became, over the course of her career from then until 1811, the largest producer of chapbooks in the county. Other than that, there's plenty of women we know of who were bookbinders, stationers, booksellers, and a fair number of whom were also hawkers. One of whom at least was no better than she should be, if one believes the contemporary court records. So I hope that answers your question, but thank you for it.
Thank you very much. And I have a question for Irena. You say the official history of the postcard begins with the first postal card. Well, it is the official history of the postcard, but this part of the history is very important. Actually, the official history of the postcard is the part of the history of, in this case, of Slovenia. And it's a great source for the history of Slovenia, as I can understand. I mean, it would be great even for the other countries to see, to compare the history of especially for unknown countries, let's say, comparing to the Western, and to see their official history through the official history of the postcards. I don't know if maybe you find it exaggerate, but I think it's very important. I mean, we can see it through lots of details on the postcards. We can add a lot of things to our official histories, if you agree.
Yes, I agree with you. Actually, there are a lot of course, there are a lot of our history is titled to the Austro-Hungarian part of the country, is the part of that, and I think there were kind of a lot of research on this part, but not in comparison with, for example, from the America or that kind of research I didn't find yet. So yes, I agree with you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that's all. Maybe there is some other panelists who have a question. Okay, there is another question. I suppose from Maureen Bell. Thank you, Irena. I'm aware of the fashion for collecting postcards and have my grandmother's album from early 90s. I guess it was popular throughout Europe and America. Is it clear why it went out of fashion?
I think because of this. Yeah, I think the generation and the thing of communication when you are abroad is changing, especially the last decade. So yes, even in our library, which we also get the legal deposit from the postcards. The part of the part of it is very, very small and very declining. So I think as I said, this is the reason why don't we do any more to communicate with each other with the postcards. So,
yeah, it seems so that we don't have any more time for the writing postcards.
Yeah.
It should look like so, right? Yeah.
Can I come in there? Can I come in there, Persida? I mean, yeah. if you go to a seaside town or a tourist place, every stationer still has 2 or 3 racks of local views outside. I mean, they wouldn't be producing them if people weren't buying them, presumably. I can't be the only person who has to send his granddaughter a postcard from every town he visits in France. So presumably, you know.
I think that people like to receive postcards. I mean, it's
Yeah.
very interesting. I mean, you know, when you
Yeah.
find your postcard, I mean, it's great. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much. I think we are out of time now, right? Ines?
Thank you, Pasida, and thank you to our
Thank you,
speakers.
Caroline.
We're actually bang on time. That's
Okay.
fantastic. Thank you for everybody keeping to schedule. We'll have a very brief 5-minute break, and we will then resume for the penultimate session today. So we will see you all in 5 minutes. Thank
Okay,
you.
Thank you.